From Interfaith Alliance, this is State of Belief Radio. I'm your host, Reverend Welton Gaddy. The Reverend Peter Laarman is Executive Director of Progressive Christians Uniting. After the election, Peter wrote in Religion Dispatches magazine about the potential moral implications of the looming fiscal cliff rhetoric, and he joins me now on State of Belief Radio to talk about that. Peter, it's always good to have you back. You're a friend as well as a good resource, and we're glad to have you on State of Belief again.
It's my pleasure.
Talk, if you will, about some of the concerns that you raised actually right after the election regarding whose interests were in danger as we debate this whole metaphorical cliff.
Well, yes, this debt crisis, as it's called, has a complicated trajectory, but it's fairly easy to track. There's a powerful group of people called the debt scolds who've been at this for a long time. Their leader is a famous financier named Pete Peterson, and I say that they prescribe austerity for you, but not for me, meaning their point of attack has been what they call entitlements. Again, I think that's a very bad label for our social insurance programs, which are the cornerstones of economic equity for a lot of disadvantaged lower-income people. They want to cut those programs. They've never liked them. That's been an agenda now for 3 decades and more, and they think of this as their moment. And their messaging about this cliff is very powerful. It gets people scared, of course. Nobody likes to tumble over a cliff. There's new polling that says that most people don't really understand what this debate is about. They want to compromise. The difficulty with a compromise in this case is if we compromise on the fat cat's terms, we're going to sacrifice these programs, which are a tremendous lifeline to people like my 90-year-old mom, for example, and people who have even less money than her and are not prepared for retirement, don't have the capacity to provide for their own health care. There's another irony in this, Welton, and that is that the countries that are significantly cutting their public sectors, as you know, have contracting economies. They're in deep, deep trouble. So one might ask, why would we do this again? But it's got its own, I would say, demonic logic. That is to say, we have a problem. The source of the problem is lower income people, so let's hit them, middle and lower income people, and let's let the people at the very top of the pyramid continue to enjoy this fabulous tax holiday that they've had since Mr. Bush came to office some time ago.
I think I'm going to ask a question that I already know the answer to, but you wrote that back in November. Have your concerns grown or lessened since then?
Regrettably, my concerns have grown, not because the president seems to be in any mood to lunge toward a compromise. I'm not concerned about that so much. I am concerned about the capacity for mystification around this. I am concerned by the capacity of the majority in the House of Representatives to engage in serious brinksmanship, and then there's this misrepresentation. Right here in Los Angeles, there's a firestorm brewing since yesterday. Our mayor, a former union organizer, right, Mayor Antonio Villaraigosa, he chaired the Democratic National Convention, signed on to the Fix the Debt group of corporate CEOs. And again, that confuses people, right? I think he'll be forced to withdraw. There's a petition campaign that's really been going like crazy to invite him to take his name off of that. But that's the kind of thing that of course, causes concern. People easily look for what they call a solution where each side has to give, but recall that the people who've gotten, again, over this past decade, are really the people who have what they used to call unearned income. I think morally, those of us in religious life need to think about that. Unearned income, that's dividends and capital gains, taxed at a very favorable rate. Nobody is talking about taking those rates back to the Eisenhower era. We're talking about restoring them to where they were in the Clinton era. And by the way, these people are referred to by the House majority as the job creators. If they're the job creators and they've had this tremendous bonanza over the past decade, where are the jobs?
Yeah.
Is it rude to ask that question?
Well, am I understanding you correctly that one of the first steps in the whole strategy of what did you call them? What did you call this group? The
super elites. Well, and the debt scold
That's
group
right.
that Pete Peterson and his institute have
that's what
organized
I meant. So,
and really worked on hard, for more than 20 years.
So is that first step to cause confusion so that most people don't understand what's going on?
Well, it may seem paranoid to think that, but I think that's how things get done in a way. I mean, if you think about these memes, and that's what they're, the linguists call them, these memes like fiscal cliff or entitlements is another one. Right? Thinking of Social Security as entitlement is just plain wrong, but still it's taken hold. And I might say, just as a sidelight, if you look at the people gathered around the tables of David Gregory or George Stephanopoulos on Sunday mornings, if you look at the people who comment on this, the talking heads, who, again, are supposed to be, a balanced group, think for a moment, remember now that the trigger on the high-income tax that the president's talking about is $250,000 per couple. How many of the people around those circles, those charmed circles of talking heads, do you suppose already make $250,000 or up individually or are part of a couple that makes that? I think pretty much all of them. And so when you think about what the mainstream media, how the mainstream media represents this, you have to think about the fact that that the folks who are talking about this continuously now in the news cycle are mostly people who probably wouldn't mind seeing Social Security get whacked. Right. They've got private investments. They're covered.
Right. Well, Peter, the reason that I wanted to talk with you, I know you understand the finances involved, but the crucial question I wanted you to answer, and you've already implied your insights, what are the moral implications of what's going on in this debate?
All right. Well, I'm a Christian minister, and we're in the Advent season where God draws near with a very clear message. I am here to comfort the poor and lift up the lowly. That's in the Magnificat, Mary's song, very profoundly. These are revolutionary texts in Advent. They align with the Hebrew prophets. I mentioned in my Religion Dispatches piece that God gives to us in the scriptures, the Hebrew scriptures, a revolutionary accounting system where the first shall be last and the last first, not in some faraway paradise, but in godly terms here and now on this earth. That's not coming from Karl Marx. That's coming from the traditions that many of us inherit. The other moral dimension here is so clear to me. That is, if you talk to austerity, if you say to someone who's making, say, $25,000 to $45,000 a year, which, by the way, is the vast majority of people who work for a living in this country, the vast majority, austerity for them has a very different impact. It has a very different impact for a 24-year-old unemployed guy on the south side of Chicago than it does for, let's say, a big agribusiness operator or a defense contractor. Do you see what I mean? So we constantly, on the religious side, on the ethical side, we constantly have to think about this. These terms that are thrown around as sort of general terms, sacrifice, mean very different things to the person who cleans my office and to Mr. Pete Peterson.
Okay, Peter, where there are moral implications, and you've indicated the direction the answer to that question goes, where there are moral implications, particularly judgmental implications, there is a vision, and there is a vision of a more socially just way to approach this whole issue. What does that vision look like to you?
Well, I think that for people who are well off, and by the way, I don't mean to demonize well off people. Many of them have stepped away from the austerity agenda or from the what I call the super elite agenda. People like Warren Buffett, for example, and there are many others. For them, it ought to be a privilege. I mean, thinking back to the Eisenhower era, it was a privilege in those days, and many business leaders and finance leaders would say so. It was a privilege for them to contribute their share, their fair share, to the Commonwealth, right? It means something, apart from private charity, for people to be part of society, to be linked to others. And what we've had is what Robert Reich some years ago called the secession of the successful, and that's just not healthy. It's not healthy for the people with less, obviously, but it's not healthy, particularly healthy for the people with more. I mean, in a way, the gospel message, the Advent message, is we're all in need. For the people down the economic scale, their need is desperate and urgent, and it's material as well as spiritual. For the people higher up, there's a spiritual need. We're spiritually impoverished if we take a beggar thy neighbor line, which I'm afraid many of our very wealthy people now do. It's like, well, I have I have the money, I have the political power to defend it, and so that's what I'm going to do. And the devil take the hindmost. I was shocked. Nothing against the Audi automobile, but I was shocked a while back when their ad said, "Crumbling infrastructure, you don't care."
Yeah. Well, Peter, as you've already indicated, probably not many of the people listening to this show will ever have a chance to sit with George Stephanopoulos and others on Sunday morning shows and talk about this. So what do you suggest to people with progressive values as to what they can do to influence the nature of this debate?
Well, the obvious one, and people don't do this nearly enough, for all the petitions flying around and what have you, very few people communicate directly with their representatives in Congress, and it's very important that even if you should never assume that your representative, if you live in a quote unquote blue area, is necessarily with you on this or is necessarily firm about it. Communicate with your representative very clearly about the ethics. Not just, this is more than a question of math. I know the president for the last couple of days has been talking about the math. He's right about the math, by the way, but it's about so much more than that. It's about what kind of society we are. And the other thing is, find a way in your house of worship or with your neighbors or in whatever context to talk about this. Don't let it be what I call a kind of phantom debate among powerful interests in D.C. Make it a conversation in your own life. It's hard for people to talk about money, but I think it's very useful here to say in a way that's inoffensive to a neighbor, to a friend. So what do you think about this stuff anyway? I'm really concerned about it, and I really fear that they're going to take the knife to Social Security and Medicare at the worst possible time, and I think they're going to do another round of horrendous cuts to domestic discretionary spending. And for what? So people who I mean, we can name the amount of money, right? How much money was pocketed, not by the top 1%, but the top 0.01% of the income scale. It's a staggering amount of money. The people who say, there's another thing about this for us, the people who talk about job creators or whatever, sometimes it's necessary to call people out and say, you're lying. That might be effective politics, but it's just not true.
I tell you what, Peter, the reason we call you is because when we call you for something, we get exactly what we ask for. And you've been truthful and prophetic and surrounded that with a lot of wisdom. Reverend Peter Laarman is Executive Director of Progressive Christians Uniting. Listen, I'm going to give you their website because you can go there and get more of this kind of good wisdom. Their website is progressivechristiansuniting.org. Peter, I want to thank you, as always, for sharing your thoughts with us and making State of Belief Radio today a better contributor to this debate because of your insights.
Thanks so much, Welton, and have a blessed holiday.
Thank you. Same to you.